Hello and welcome to today's OnePlan webinar, Balancing Resource Capacity and Priorities for Better Business Outcomes. We're going to cover a lot of ground today at a kind of a superficial level. At multiple points, I'll suggest that if you have any deeper questions, you get a hold of us, ask us for a demo, or if anything that I say seems unlikely or seems particularly interesting, please feel free to start a free trial and test for yourself. Good. So I like to start out talking about resource capacity planning and resource issues by comparing it to donut sales, which at first blush might seem trivial. But if you think about it, every single day, you have a bunch of donuts behind the counter. On an ideal day, you sell almost all of the donuts. And I say almost all of the donuts because if you sell 100% of the donuts, it's an indication that maybe you could have sold more than you realized. So your goal is, again, always to sell almost all of your donuts, at which point you know that you have probably maximized your return on your donut investment. The same thing goes for resources and hours. At the start of every day, every resource you have has 8 hours to provide value to your company. By the end of the day, maybe they will have used all 8 hours in pursuit of value. Maybe they'll have used less than 8. But either way, again, kind of just like the donuts, you want to be in a position where you're clearing almost all the hours. This takes two forms. Every company is slightly different. In the world of consulting or contracting, this often means chargeable hours. In the world of internal projects where you are running a strategic portfolio and you're attempting to maximize investments, it still means hours. It may mean chargeback, it may not. But it definitely means that you want to have your resources as devoted as they can be to showing a return on the investment. Just like donuts as well, donuts come in different varieties, people come in different varieties. You've got to have the right mix in order to, again, get as close as you can to having an almost empty glass counter at the end of the day. So we're going to kind of return to this periodically because it is important as we talk about maximizing the return on our resources, our resource investment versus our strategic objectives. It's certainly a lot more complicated in a modern company, but at the end of the day, this metaphor really does hold a lot of water. So what are the resource management challenges that make this more complicated than selling donuts? First of all, resources in a modern organization have owners, people that are responsible for them or need to report to someone as to what those resources we're working on. And they may not be the same people that are looking to optimize investments. So the ownership is often scattered and has competing objectives. The resources themselves choose, as people do, to focus on what they think is going to make them look good or what they are interested in. So that oftentimes means that they're making choices at a micro level that might undercut strategy at a top level. There's also, of course, the invisible work, work that fills a lot of people's days that doesn't really end up being classified as anything. In this case, we're calling it a project, but it could be anything at all. There's the notion of how we're going to track what those resources are doing. There's the notion of even what resources we have. Then finally, there's making sure that having tracked it and knowing what resources you have, you're able to put it into a report. And then once you have done that, are you providing the right information about what people are doing in order to support executive decision making? Now, these are the items that all kind of complicate this and make this obviously, again, much more complicated than selling donuts. But in the end, it all does at the same time boil down to the same thing. You have a certain number of hours every day that's available to your company, and how do you make sure they line up with the things that you want people to do? So understanding resource capacity, I don't think there's probably anything too surprising about this. Capacity amounts to, how many hours we can give. If we have 100 people that can give 8 hours a day, you have 800 hours every day available to do work. And then additionally to that, they may have certain skills or be able to participate in certain roles, whereas others can't. Demand, of course, comes from a variety of sources. They can be put on projects, they can be put on sprints or onto epics. They can be simply assigned work that they need to get done. But in any case, each area of demand, of course, serves to decrement the 800 hours or the 8 hours a day each individual has. So ultimately, the goal, and we're using kind of project in a broad generic sense here. Ultimately, the goal is to ensure that when we decide to make an investment, which is any decision about what people work on, when we decide to make an investment of someone's hours, or when we decide to make an investment, that there are actually enough hours and the right kind of hours available to see the investment through until the benefits are realized. So today, Excel does a lot of this lift. There's a good reason why it does a lot of this lift. Excel is widely available. Everybody knows how to use it for the most part, at least in a rudimentary fashion. People are oftentimes unaware there are alternatives, but also, and this is important, Excel is incredibly flexible. Excel will kind of do and look the way you want to make it look. And so, you know, what we see in this business is a ton of very good work done in very, let's call it idiosyncratic and narrow visions of how to solve these problems. And I say that because the more one person works on anything, the more it becomes a reflection of whatever it was that they were subjected to when they were building it. But that probably doesn't hold true across the organization, which leads me to the problems with Excel. When we say lack of standards, it's that same amazing flexibility of Excel that leads to it being problematic when you need to have multiple people working in an environment where their community behavior ultimately drives a set of results. Excel spreadsheets are quite easy to break. They're quite difficult to harden. They can be quite difficult to debug. They can be very time consuming when you need to make modifications. They end up oftentimes being disconnected. And honestly, they end up, again, because of the immense virtues of Excel, it ends up being very isolating. So once something is working, people really don't want to shift away from it. But it is probably only working in a very narrow definition. OnePlan is going to connect this notion of strategy, what your leadership wants to see done, with how it actually gets done. And it's important that we kind of pause a moment on this slide and say, this is not about project planning and projects and work breakdown structures necessarily. This is about agile and any other project methodology you may have. If you want to be doing things in Kanban cards, we'll talk about that a little bit. If you want to be doing planning for non-project, non-agile time that just amounts to me projecting a little bit of time out into the future as to what a person is going to be spending their time on, OnePlan supports all of that and more. And it's very important, again, because the goal is to be able to look across the organization all at once and be able to say, this is how we operate to maximize the investment we're making in our resources. So just to touch briefly on Agile, because a lot of times these discussions become semi-religious about, you know, which methodology we're going to use, and we don't want to use that methodology. As far as OnePlan is concerned, it is methodology agnostic. We recognize that the Agile methodology is good at what it is good at. We also recognize that in most of our corporate clients, there's a lot of project work that is concerned and focused on scope and delivery and on budget that doesn't necessarily fit as well into an Agile release cadence. So in both cases, however, we also, again, want to say, look, either project type or work type or planning type is decrementing the resources availability and represents demand. And you want that all at once in a place where you can say, look, we are working on the right things. So I'm about to head into the demonstration, and I just want to kind of lay out ahead of time how we're going to do this, because we're going to, again, cover a few things at a very shallow and superficial level. There's a lot of depth that we could go into, but if we do on any one of them, they'll become a whole webinar unto themselves. So we're going to start out with linking project investments to objectives and key results. OKRs you might be familiar with OKRs, you might not be. It's a mechanism for saying what the objectives of the organization are and what the results are that we want to come from it and how we're going about getting those things. In other words, about aligning what it is that we could be working on with a method for demonstrating to your leadership that you are in fact delivering what they want. Then we're going to move on to resourcing based on project schedules. Resourcing based on project schedules is maybe what a lot of people are also familiar with and what they think of as typical project management. You have a work breakdown structure, you have a Gantt chart with some tasks with dependencies across each other, and you put resources on those tasks. The resource demand, of course, then bubbles up from that. Conversely, and importantly, will be point 3, resourcing based on capacity planning. What that means is you flip, as it were, you flip the script, and instead of starting with a project schedule and a WBS, you simply start with an investment. You might call it a project, you might call it something else, or you might simply call it work that needs to be done, for example, and you put resources on that. You do not overcomplicate things, you don't worry about schedule logic, and in fact, you kind of work in a very spreadsheet-like environment to do this as simply and as quickly as possible. Again, the point being that this represents the way a lot of people think about work planning, and in fact is very effective, but it also represents a demand on the resources capacity that needs to be shown alongside the project schedule-driven demand. Finally, we're going to talk about leveraging our modeler to investigate and select between possible scenarios. This is maybe one of the most exciting and powerful pieces of OnePlan, and I hope you think so as well. It enables a team to show multiple scenarios in contrast with each other. And instead of going back to an executive or a sponsor or an external organization and say, hey, no, we can't do that, we don't have any capacity. It enables you to go back and take scenarios and say, well, if you make this set of decisions, then we can execute against this scenario and these investments for you. If you make this other set of decisions, then these are the scenarios that we can execute against you. And oh, you want to make some changes in how we prioritized or how we laid these out, we can do that for you on the fly, all while reflecting what's actually in our system and what could hypothetically be in our system. So it's a nice kind of cap to saying, this is how you can actually take the work you've done, linking your investment efforts back to a set of objectives that you've been given and demonstrate that this is how you can most effectively or did most effectively deliver against those objectives. Okay. So this is OnePlan, and I'm going to call a couple things out at first. OnePlan is role configurable. I'm currently configured as an administrator that can see everything, as you might guess, because I need to work on this demo. But for any particular implementation, you would expect each role would see only what they need to see, or as much as they need to see. And that includes both the kinds of projects they can see, but more the features that they can see. So in this case, for this particular demo, for example, we will not talk about timesheets. We won't talk about innovation and my ideas, but we will talk about my strategy, my portfolio, resource planning, and we will talk about the modeler. Now, in an environment that was fully configured, the other things wouldn't show up. So one of the kind of key pieces that I'll reiterate several times with OnePlan is that what you're seeing is a matter of configuration. A lot of things can be removed to simplify things, but there is no secret sauce. We're very public about how our product is configured. We offer consulting as well, of course, but if for some reason you decide you would rather go it alone, or you want to make sure that you can ultimately internalize the skill that it takes to configure OnePlan, we provide you all the resources to do that, and we don't put you in a position where you must call us back. So I'm going to select the strategic section. We're not going to dwell on this. Again, this in and of itself is an entire webinar, but it serves as an anchor point for why we are doing certain things and tying how we assign resources back to what our leadership has asked us to do. So in this case, we have a list of objectives, and we are able to, of course, expand those if I choose, and underneath you have a list of key results. A couple things that I want to just call attention to, again, that we won't necessarily dwell on. OnePlan has this very powerful feature called plan type. You'll see this change over the course of the demo. Plan types carry with them the ability to show details. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this objective and say, show me details on this. Each one of these detail pages is configurable per plan type and per department, but we won't dig into that. Each one has a workflow that is configurable as well. Proposed, active, closed is just happens to be the example that we have, but you're able to configure all the fields, the objective descriptions, the schedules, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my strategy, and I'm going to drill down into a key result, in this case, the reduced server downtime by 50%. And again, these things are entirely configurable. So the key result, of course, carries different fields. Key result, blah, blah, blah. Down below, we see that it has ideas and projects associated with it. Now, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're not going to go into how idea functionality works, but we have projects that are associated with this key result. And again, the goal being that any work done on these projects, we would have identified as contributing to that particular key result. So when we go to resource these projects, we will be in a position where we can say, okay, we're putting people on this, and that's good because we know that it's supporting our particular objective. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my portfolio. And I'm going to open this up just a little bit. So you can see that the plan type is now portfolio. It in this case includes programs, and if that makes sense in your environment. So we're not into approach particular demo. I just want to kind of mention to the fact that thing about OnePlan that to understand, each one of these list views, you can see up here, are configurable in terms of the columns, in terms of what content it has. I'm just going to show real quickly. We have a selection of views pre-configured for demo. Let's go ahead and click. Well, maybe we won't click on that. Let's just go back to the portfolio summary. All right, well, we're back to the trending view. Okay, so this is the trending view fully configured. You can see obviously that it has a different set of fields. I only show this to kind of show the variety that you can have in terms of how you configure these list views. I'm going to go back and select the portfolio summary view again. And here we are back here. We also support board views. So if you want to work in an environment, a Kanban style environment, we support a fully configurable set of columns and rows. Each card, it represents the exact same information from the list view. This is a drag and drop environment, just like you would expect, and you can drill into each card as well. Finally, we have roadmap views, top-down views of things you are accomplishing as time moves forward. I don't think there needs to be a huge amount of explanation in this, but I want to say in terms of OnePlan, you will see this repeated over and over, the list, the board, and the roadmap style views supporting various methodologies while still operating on the same data, which allows people to work and plan the way they want to. Finally, dashboard for Power BI. We leverage Power BI as an out-of-the-box feature. all reporting and or dashboarding tools are supported through the same mechanism, however, and by that I mean if you have any other reporting or dashboarding tool that you want incorporated into OnePlan, they all work from the same OData feed, so you won't have less data to pay if you use a different reporting tool. It's just that out of the box, we provide a ton of Power BI reports that, of course, are then fully configurable by either, the end user or for our consulting services, depending on which makes more sense. Okay, back to the list view. Drill down real quickly. And again, I realize that I'm glossing over a lot just so that I can get back to talking about making sure that we're tying resources back to the organization's objectives. So I'm going to go in and open up this particular plan called Work Planner. I'm going to first go over here, select the details. And you can see that we have a different workflow because this is a different work plan type. Again, completely configurable. Business case, project prioritization piece. This will be important. We'll repeat this several times as we look at this. Project schedule, financials, its impact, its trending impact, et cetera, et cetera. Most important though, we want to come over to the work plan, take a look at this in list form. And this should be immediately familiar to most people. This is a kind of a classic work breakdown structure. Again, Gantt chart to the one side, resources and tasks over to this side. First, very simply, resourcing plans. Again, creating demand on this project that has been approved for investment. Very straightforward. I come in, I say resources, assign resources, and I get a list of resources from across the organization. Now, of course, this can be filtered and grouped in ways that make sense. We have organizations that have tens of thousands of resources, and we don't expect them to scroll through a list of tens of thousands of resources. We can also group people into teams. So if you have people that consistently work on projects or investments together, you don't have to put them individually on each and every time. You can clump them into a team and assign the team, and then that will represent their demand. Going to now kind of secondarily, if I want to have a more sophisticated approach to resourcing, I can open up a resource pool underneath the project. And in order to make sure that I'm actually assigning people that can get work done, I'm able to see demand from across the system and within the project as well. Looking at this and saying, okay, I have a business analyst role. I want to look at this and say, I don't want a business analyst. I want a named resources to come in and take care of this. I'm going to click on candidates list and I'm going to say, find me the best match. And I'm going to get a view from across the resource pool showing me people that match this particular resource and that have their capacity. So I can bring them in to work on this task in this project based on their capacity from across the entire organization. And again, we've got a lot of sophistication around finding resources and replacing resources that we weren't going to necessarily go deep on in this particular item. The key point is that for item 1, we're working from an approved project that is linked and has a strategic value to a certain objective, and we're resourcing that based on capacity from across the organization. So we're making the most of our view of what the people are doing and making sure that we're actually getting done what we need to get done. Okay. I'm going to switch now to the resource plan. This is the second point, and a lot of times organizations that are used to a project-centric view of the world don't quite know what to make of this. However, an organization that, for example, is used to optimizing for chargeable resources or concerned about utilization recognize this view of the world right away. This starts with a named resource, and instead of saying, oh, I have a project and I have tasks and I need to put people on the tasks, this starts with, oh, I have a person, Angela, and she could be working on various projects. So in other words, it basically flips it around and says, I look at these, in this case, things that she's already working on, and I say, I think for May, she's going to put another 100 hours in on this project, for example. What does this get you? So this puts your organization in a position where perhaps people aren't doing project work. Maybe they're doing work on, for example, an epic, or maybe they're doing work that has nothing to do with epics or projects. It just happens to be work, and you want to make sure that you are showing that they, those hours are being spent doing something. You're able to come in a very spreadsheet-like environment, represent that demand, making sure that people are working on what they're supposed to be working on and they're not over capacity, all without actually, creating a situation where you have hidden work that's stopping you from your organization from getting the most value out of what people are doing. As an aside in this, we do have an approval process for this as well. So if you are an organization that wants to request and approve resource assignments, we can support that. And of course, we can at the same time show the value of what we call committed. Say you wanted to look at Angela and you were wondering what her resource manager thought she was doing versus scheduled. You want to look at Angela and ask yourself, hey, what did her project manager think she was doing? You can contrast those two as well and align those if that makes sense. So again, I'm going to say the key here is by creating a completely different and much more straightforward and much less feature-rich mechanism for doing resource planning, you can actually make sure you are capturing demand from across the organization, regardless of what it might actually, what the planning methodology might actually be. Another key point, which often comes up, is do we integrate with systems like Active Directory and Jira? And the answer is absolutely. And that is a great source of good value add. If you can agree, this is the level we want to pull back into OnePlan, epic level, whatever as deep as user story level, if that's what you want to go to. And you can say, okay, we want to represent this as demand and or actuals in OnePlan. But no, we're still going to manage our work out here over here in Azure DevOps. Okay, so the third and the final point that I want to make sure that I go over is the modeler. So the modeler is based on this notion that you can create a model with certain business assumptions and or constraints. And within that model, you can create scenarios. And again, the real utility in this is we have people who have normally need to seek out across Excel and PowerPoints and disparate systems, Smartsheet, you name it. What are people working on? And then having assembled all that, they scurry to put it into a spreadsheet that they then scurry to put around into a PowerPoint slide, and they walk into their executive leader and they present it as the only kind of thing that can be done, and it takes a long time, sometimes months, and having done that, then if there are any changes at all, that requires a bunch of scurrying back through, and the changes themselves take weeks, and again, it ends up being a very non-responsive and frankly unimpressive way to demonstrate that you're delivering value. If you employ the modeler and scenario planning, however, you're enabled to show based on live data. So this is accurate and live as of right now from across the system, and plus theoretical work that you might or might not do in a prioritized environment. So at that point, you've moved from an office that says no to your leadership to an office that gives them a ton of information in a very digestible way. And so I want to call your attention to the prioritization score down the side. Again, this can be a calculated field. You can also, of course, just select priority if you want to. I'm going to change the view real quickly to the executive prioritization. The executive prioritization is called the executive prioritization because we all work with leadership, and I can see that there's a prioritization score that this has been ordered by, but I might have somebody say, you know what, this facility expansion effort is the #1 thing on my list, so I'm just going to need to drag and drop that up to the top. Now you can see that it doesn't change the prioritization score, but for the purposes of working in the model, you've now put this at the top, and that's important, and I'll show you why in a second. I'm going to put this back down here just to keep things clean, because I'm able to create scenarios within this model, and we'll call this one the $15 million scenario, for example. And the $15 million scenario is, it says we've got $15 million to spend, and down here below the line, we've deselected items that we don't think we can afford. Now, the interesting piece is for the purpose of this particular demonstration, we can do the same thing with resources underneath. So when we choose, let's go back and just take a look at no constraints. So that is, we just do everything in this model. We have the impact on the resource pool down below. And again, you can take a look at this and drill down a little bit and see what he's working on. But I can then kind of come in and I can say, okay, again, I want to go through and I want to select and deselect based on the prioritization, whatever it is. And I can say, well, if you give us 15 million, we can do it this way. If you can do it 10 million, we can do it this way. I might come up with a $20 million scenario and save that as well. So now I've got 3 scenarios, but you get the idea. You're able to create and save scenarios based on your resource capacity underneath. And again, you're able to walk in and say, this is what we can get done, and this is why. So importantly, I think everybody should probably be wondering at this point is, how do I actually look at the two? So I'm able to take scenario 1, scenario 2, and this is all configurable, of course, as well. Hit compare, and I can see what's in, what's out. I can see the relative priorities. I can see various pieces of this and why I did these things. If you want at some point, and you, for example, just don't want to show anybody this particular tool, but you want to export these things to a mechanism where you can, maybe clean it up a little bit or do something that looks a little bit more fancy, you want to spend an hour because it's worth it, that's great. You can export these things and actually have them ready. But the key being that even if you do choose to export it and you need to come back and make changes, because this isn't a difficult lift to pull together, it's fairly easy to come back in, make the changes, and redo the export and redo another presentation instead of it being weeks more work. So to tie this all back together, down below, you can see that we have the visualization of what we are doing and why we're doing it. Now, keep in mind, we can work with this model and these scenarios. We can create as many scenarios underneath this model as we feel like, and we can create models all day long if we feel like that as well. So we're in a position where we can really move things around and see how are we delivering, in this case, against our objectives that we've identified, how it leads to key results, and how it leads to various plans and or products, if that makes sense, in a visual way. So you would be able to be in a position where, and this is quite complicated actually, and you would of course want to be able to blow this up if you were actually presenting it, but you find yourself where you're able to visualize the impact of decisions that you've made in these scenarios. So not only are you able to model and create scenarios based on how you're serving your objectives, but having done so, if that's the angle that you've taken, you can look at your prioritization list, see how it matches up with what you've actually shown here. You can then resource according to what you think you want to do in terms of these objectives and these key results. And you can, again, and I think this being the most important thing, you can demonstrate how you will deliver against what your leadership is hoping to see you deliver against, all in a much, much faster fashion than what you can do if you had to pull this all together in a separate environment and go through all of this modeling in a completely completely different Excel spreadsheet, for example. Okay. So in summary, resource management and linking it to a company's objectives is I don't want to say that it's obviously important, even though it obviously is. I think, and certainly, our client base would agree that what helps is lifting some of these decisions out of obscurity by making them easier to show and to demonstrate kind of in a real environment, and be able to walk into a room confident that you're not going to be bombarded with questions that will take months to answer, and be confident that what you presented is, again, not a simple no, we can't do it, we need more money. It's actually a set of options for somebody to look at and to think about and say, oh, I identified this objective as my objective. And yes, I do want to see that that's being served. And I see that I've changed my mind. And, but maybe now that I look at it this way, I realize I do want to stay on that objective. So the other thing is, when it comes to doing these kinds of plans, and I hope that this was clear as well, the difficulty in planning should match both the expertise and the utility, the return on the plan. So if planning should be simple, OnePlan in particular will make it simple. If planning needs to be a very complicated, program with multiple interdependent projects, OnePlan is a whole other webinar, by the way, that OnePlan can support that as well. In the end, however, what we want to be doing is, again, making sure that all the resource demand is in one place and that we can see what the impact will be of making changes. OnePlan is consistently recognized as a market leader. I've made a lot of claims and said a lot of things through this webinar. Connect us and have us show. I would like to encourage anybody in a little more to go through and create a fruit. Now you'll have a lot when it comes to picking a multiple won't be up. The important each one templates of configuration. There's secret sauce. You have custom code anything to create these templates. You could take the strategic portfolio management template and put it into the product portfolio template if you want to take the time and go through the fields and the views and the processes. But what I would really, again, really want to encourage is, if anything in this struck you as, wow, can they really do that? You should definitely download the free trial and have a go, or contact us, or both. And with that, I would like to thank you. I appreciate your time today. I hope this was useful, and please feel free to reach out and contact us if you have any questions at all.